Welcome everyone to the Sacred Hockey Mask. I am Peter, and joining me, as always, is...
Lady Shasha, Mistress of the Snark, coming to you from sunny Orlando, Florida.
And this is a horror movie show where we have watched a movie and we talk about it. It's really quite that simple. And in this episode, we are watching our vote winner, our Patreon vote winner, every month on patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Our $5 and up patrons get to vote from a selection of newer released movies that we will talk about on this show. The winner becomes an episode. The runner-up becomes the Patreon exclusive bonus episode. And this is the winner from last month. This is Censor, a movie that I saw having some buzz from a few months ago. It came out in, I think, June-ish. And this is a movie about a woman who works at the BBFC, although I think the movie avoids ever saying the name of the company, of the organization. But, you know, knowing from history, it's the BBFC. And this is the height of the video nasties, which I will define for anyone who doesn't know what that is. I'll explain that in a minute. But she's a censor who watches films and then like sort of dictates what should be edited out so it can be released at an 18 rating, or if indeed it should be banned outright in the UK. So it is a British movie, and it's a Welsh director, Prano Bailey Bond. And I could never have told you from that name if that was a male or female name, but it is a woman director. I have since discovered. And I believe it is the directorial sort of debut, or at least feature-length debut. At least I assume some short films have happened. They usually do. But there's the main character of Eden, or not Eden, sorry, Enid. Yes, that lovely name. Enid has a bit of a troubled past where her sister went missing when she was a child, and starts to think she recognizes someone who may be her grown-up sister in one of the films that she is viewing to sort of censor, basically. So that is the basic premise of Censor. We will start spoiler-free, of course, as we always do, and we will give you a warning before we go to spoilers. So yeah, that's the gist of it. So I'd heard a lot of buzz. Had you been hearing buzz about this before you watched it?
On the festival circuit, I saw that it was on festival circuit for a long time here.
Yeah, I had just seen some other reviewers when it came out, when it hit the internet properly in streaming services in June. I'd seen some people recommend it, and we're talking, giving it some buzz. It's got a distinct poster. I do like the poster a lot, where it's got like that sort of blurry VHS line about 2/3 up, and above that line, it's it's the main character of Enid, looking like she does throughout the movie, where she's got like these glasses. She looks like she's from the 80s, which is when it's set, obviously. But then below that sort of VHS line, you have like her holding an axe, and it's kind of like, well, I suppose you could say she's hacking up the film reels with the axe, but I suspect there's going to be more than that in the movie, and we're going to discover. So no, I was curious about this one, especially since I do, before I even get to like, if I like the movie or not, I will say the idea of a movie centered around a character who is censoring films in the early 80s in the UK is a really interesting setting for a horror movie. So I like that, and I'll explain what the video nasties are in a minute, but I think I'll get the initial impression before I do that. So Shasha, what did you make of Censor?
I thought it is a great looking film. I think the director has a good eye. She may have overused the red lighting a little too much. I think it becomes less effective if you use it throughout the whole movie. I like the concept, but
there's a lot of building up to a but there.
I was bored to tears a lot of times, and it was hard making it through this movie. I just felt that the execution was just so, like, there's a slow burn and then there's watching paint dry, and this is closer to watching paint dry than slow burn. And for people who aren't familiar with me, my idea of a really great slow burn movie is like something like House of the Devil, that had a great slow burn to it. This, not so much.
I do wonder sometimes, like, where the subjective and objective line of what a good slow burn and a bad slow, because I think some of it is just a personal taste thing where
Yeah.
some movies will come off just feeling just right because you're just so captivated by it, but to someone else it's just like you say, watching paint dry. Which is not to say that I completely disagree with you on this. I think I was a little disappointed because there was so much buzz for this that I was expecting to love it. I agree. I think the technical qualities, the way it uses VHS looking footage at times, the way it plays with aspect ratio. We'll talk about aspect ratios. I know everyone loves when I bring up the aspect ratio talk. I love the setting, the character's job, the sort of the framework for which the story's built in. I do have to say that once the actual investigation of like the backstory that connects to her really kicks in, I do have to agree that it's a little bit slow at times and not in a good way. And I don't think I'm as harsh as you. I don't think I have quite the it was like watching paint dry levels of apathy.
And I'm surprised at myself because we just recently talked about Saint Maud, which you would think would feel slower than this, but I was more engaged in Saint Maud than I was with this. I can't put my finger on why though.
I think it's the type of, because it's like an investigation movie where like she's presented with a mystery and she's trying to work it out. There was definitely some sort of metaphors going on related to what her job is that I kind of liked, and there was stuff like that. But ultimately, the actual investigation is kind of like a noir almost, and that she's trying to like find things. And I don't know if I like the psychological, because it's definitely a psychological horror movie, in that there's elements of like her like seeing like more of this film in her head and sort of bleeding into the narrative as it goes on. You know, some of that, like, I think I like some of the transitions, but I don't know if I necessarily like it as a plot device. I find it a little bit kind of easy at times. Because the introduction, the start of the movie is great. The start of the movie is like, you know, we're watching this cheesy 4:3 VHS looking movie, and then eventually it does the thing where it pauses and rewinds, and then we cut to the real world, and it's the full widescreen, and it's 2.35 to 1, and she's sitting there in a viewing room with her partner, and they're debating like how much of a gore scene should be left in, like, you know, is the eye gouging too much, is that, and those sort of discussions are really interesting. And the opening titles play out over like, you know, clips of different video nasties and clips of like the media at the time talking about the video nasties, and all that was very effective. It did put me in a mood, like I was in a good mood like going into the start of the movie from that. So but I do agree, and I do like the lighting and the giallo inspired greens and reds that it uses. But I do have to say that the actual like looking for answers that sort of then takes place did start to like bore me quite quickly. So it's short enough, and I have to say I do like the ending. I think the last like 15 minutes are quite good. But I do have to admit there is some sag in the middle. I wasn't that captivated by the actual looking for answers that I'd be hoping for. So I still say good overall. I'd still say I'd recommend it to people to check out, because I think it's good enough that people might connect to it more than I did, and people might really dig it. And certainly other people have, because there was a lot of buzz for this summer. But yeah, I'll explain the video nasties for everyone who needs a. And the movie does an okay job of explaining it, to be honest. But and I assume you know a video.
Yeah, some of the footage that they showed at the beginning included real video nasties.
It did?
I wrote it in my notes, but I didn't write the movies down. I wish I would have written the movies down, because now I can't remember which movies they were. I can't recognize them.
I'm sure there's some proper horror nerds out there who recognize every single clip. I can say I recognize Driller Killer. I recognized a couple. They mentioned Deranged at one point, which I've seen. You know, so, but I've not seen them all. And the truth is, and this is one of the funny things about the video nasties, is that I'd say a good like majority of that list are just shit. They are not actually that worth seeing. But because they're on that list, there's a mystique. They were on the video nasty list. Now, obviously, Evil Dead was on that list, and Evil Dead is a movie that's well worth seeing. But a lot of them aren't. A lot of them are just trash. And the sad part is that they gave the movies this mystique and this like aura, and that made people want to see them. So as we see in the movie at one point, yeah, there were video rental places who had them under the like they had like the pirated copies under the counter for rental because people wanted to see them. But But the Video Nasties, it was basically conservative government at the time in the UK. VHS hit big. All of a sudden, people had VCRs in their homes, and video rentals was this new thing that kind of changed the game. And all of a sudden, Margaret Thatcher, that bitch, and her conservative government wanted to censor and ban movies, and it became this really harsh thing where by the time you get to the early 2000s, a lot of like the attitude had changed, and a lot of movies were being resubmitted and passed uncut and being released on DVD uncut. But things were very harsh at the start of the 80s, and this is like around 1983-ish, where things were just being slashed left and right. Movies weren't legally allowed to be in the UK unless they were chopped to bits for the more violent stuff. Stuff that had a lot of gang rape in it was just outright banned. And for the most part, yeah, those movies aren't worth seeing. Most of them do suck. Most of them are just crappy exploitation that isn't worth watching, but they have this aura that people seek them out because they want to see all the movies on the list. They made a list that's now famous, but they were called...
There's one YouTuber that his whole channel is just like, well, I wouldn't say whole channel, maybe 98% of his channel is just watching the entire 78 list long or title long Video Nasties.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I'm always surprised when I hear, like, because I think if you're a UK horror fan, it's impossible not to hear about this. But you do meet like American horror fans who have no idea what the Video Nasties are occasionally. And then you have to explain like what the censorship was like and how it was, because I think one of the things that's weird that people don't realize when they're outside the US is that home media in the US doesn't actually have to be rated. Now, a lot of stores, like I think Walmart and some other stores, won't carry a movie on like Blu-ray or DVD unless it has the R rated or the the MPA rating on the back. But in the UK or Australia or most of mainland Europe, like we're so used to seeing, like if you look at a movie on VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, whatever, you're used to seeing that big age rating on the front, on the spine, and on the back, and it's always very big and bold and colorful, and it's very like it's distinct, right? It's really ugly. In fact, I could right now the audio listeners won't get to see this, but I've just grabbed a random Blu-ray of Pontypool, which I had sitting on my desk, and you can see in the corner there's a big circle that says 15 in it, right? And even that's notable. This would have been, if this was submitted in 1983, it'd have been an 18 at best, but the attitudes have changed and this is now a 15. And what's even worse is that because typically all the stuff that's sold in the UK is also in Ireland, which is a different place, they also have the big blue Irish logo in a lot of them as well. So it's this ugly logo that takes up a bunch of the cover. Australia's is the worst though. Australia's this big block on the front. I have a few Australian Blu-rays I could go grab, but
the US is the opposite. You have to look so close.
Yeah, you have to go hunting.
You have to look. I don't even know if I can get it on camera. It's so tiny.
There you go. Yeah, but it's
somewhere in this brick of text, and it's really, really tiny.
Up a bit.
The rating.
Yeah. So yeah, the US covers the US like DVDs and Blu-rays don't like.
Yeah, and it's not on the front at all.
Yeah.
There's no rating on the front. You have to look on the back, and it's written in white lettering on dark blue. So like.
Yeah, and what's so funny about that, that's why, like, director's cuts or extended cuts in the US are often referred to as unrated, because technically they are unrated. Now, they're not usually that saucy, they're usually just some extra scenes have been put back in, but technically they've not been through the MPA, so therefore they're unrated and it sounds juicy. But they can't call them that in the UK, because legally you can't release anything on any platform if it's not been rated. Well, at least until technically recently. And by recently, I mean the dawn of the internet, because the internet's definitely made it a lot more complicated because, well, I put something on YouTube that can be watched in the UK. That didn't go through the through the BBFC. They didn't slap a 12 on it or whatever it would get based on the discussions we have. So that definitely opens things up, and I do believe that online streaming services don't need to have a BBFC rating on their media, but most of the big ones will do it anyway to play nice with the rules. So if you watch something on Netflix, Amazon, like their originals, because the movies will have ratings anyway from when they were released elsewhere, but the originals will still be submitted and get a rating on those big services. Yeah, YouTube's kind of a weird thing. Like I don't know how they how technically, like there may come a day where like the BBFC will demand, like the British government demand that there'll be like a rating system in place for something like YouTube, and I don't know how that works when they try to enforce it, but at
I've
least
already started doing it on my videos. Like if I talk about a film, like what's the last one that I did that for? Like extreme horror, when I do a review for extreme horror, I'll put a parental advisory before, like at the beginning of my video, so that people
sure,
know
but
that the type of horror that I'll be discussing is like.
yeah, we can sort of self do it to a point, and we can, you know, we can sort of list the video as only appropriate for mature audiences, which I've only done when I've had like a clip from a movie that's had like a gory scene, and just to make sure I'm legally in the clear,
Yeah.
I'll put that as mature only. Which hurts the advertising a little bit, but I'd rather do that than, you know, potentially get into trouble for letting kids see, you know, someone get their eye stabbed out or something. But if they ever did decide that they have, and maybe this is why they haven't, because it's just impossible to do it, but they would have to like for it to be BBFC certified, someone that works for them has to watch it and like tick it off and say this has been certified by someone who works at the BBFC. Could you imagine them having to try and like watch everything that goes up on YouTube to see if it's suitable for, like, it's impossible, which is probably why it's just not happened, because it's unfeasible to even think about doing. But that's interesting. It's an interesting discussion, and it's interesting how technology gets ahead of the system and how they can't keep up with it, and how they have to sort of reconsider things a little bit. And they can't like do this for, like, you know, other like imagine like all the videos on Instagram or Twitter or TikTok having to go through some sort of system. Like the fact is that they're kind of obsolete in many ways. And it's just kind of is what it is. Obviously, there has to be standards. There has to be, like, you know, like snuff movies and stuff just can't exist. But that's the sort of thing where that sort of self-polices in a way, because YouTube has advertisers and YouTube doesn't want to have their advertisers pissed off. So there's lines where they will not let you cross. And that's good. There should be lines like that can't be crossed. There should be things like real cruelty to animals or children or whatever it may be shouldn't be exploited. But it's just interesting to view it through the lens of like how things used to be, where everything was so meticulously watched and had to be ticked off and possibly edited to, like, you know, be allowed to be released. So anyway, the video Nasties was a list of movies that they deemed like horrific or inappropriate, and either were passed with heavily edited versions or were just banned outright for years. And in some cases they were banned for like 20, 30 years. And there's a few films that still won't be passed uncut. Like I Spit in Your Grave, you still can't technically get uncut in the UK. Now, admittedly, we're in the 21st century. It's very, very easy to import a Blu-ray if you want to, or use a VPN to watch it on a foreign streaming service. Like, you can get around it very easily if you want to. But technically speaking, there are still films like that are still cut in the UK. So
also, I want to mention before we continue about how different countries view censorship of different subjects. Like I've noticed that with the UK, it is definitely more towards like violence, gore, whereas in the US, it's more towards nudity and sexuality. It's so wild that in the US, you can make a movie and like blow up 100 heads, but if you show one penis, they'll be like, no. Whereas in the UK, I've watched regular television shows where people are running around, not necessarily full frontal nudity, but you see nudity on just the regular TV shows like the Shameless, and I think there was some nudity on Misfits, and it's not a big deal. I remember a friend of ours when the whole Janet Jackson thing happened, where she had the wardrobe malfunction and her breast was seen at the Super Bowl halftime show. There were people that were asking me that were from Canada. They were like, why is this front page news? Why is this weird? It's just a breast.
Yeah,
like
it's like, oh, it's a little funny that it happened, but who cares? Let's move on with our lives. Yeah. Now I remember, like, as long as it's after 9 p.m., you can show 18 rated material in the UK on any channel, right? Now, admittedly, it'd be weird if Cartoon Network suddenly started doing it, but but in most of the channels that have entertainment aimed at adults, they can do it after 9 p.m. And what's funny is I remember watching like a talk show. Graham Norton, who's like one of the talk show hosts in the UK, he used to do a show back when he was on Channel 4. I remember them showing a guy like they had like a funny bit where the crowd or the contestant was trying to guess who wasn't wearing underwear under a kilt, and they'd have a fan come on and blow up the kilt, and when it got to the person who wasn't wearing underwear, you saw it, like you saw his penis, like it was on TV. So yeah, it's like they have a harsh opinion about hardcore sex, like hardcore pornography, but if the penis is flaccid, like they're pretty easy going about it. So you know, yeah, different ideas, and it's one of those weird things where like did the audience know going into that show that like there was going to be someone like exposing their genitalia to the crowd? Like, should they be upset about that? Because, you know, there's a lot of conversations about like how much are people comfortable with in terms of nudity and like a work environment and things like that. And it's just interesting that, yeah, there is clearly an easygoing attitude to, no, it's part of the show, so it's fair game for him to have his dick out. And everyone laughed and clapped, and it was a funny moment that, you know, everyone anticipated. I guess you get away with it just by saying, you know, this is a show for adults. Anyone who comes needs to be an adult, and we'll see adult material of some kind, possibly. But it's just an interesting
and also it's
philosophy.
just the human body. The more it's so wild that Americans or America's extreme puritanism has made people do the exact opposite, because everything is just so you can't show nudity. Then you have like our musical artists constantly pushing that envelope because it's a taboo. If it wasn't taboo here to show your body, then you wouldn't have our artists constantly look at my body. Aren't I being a rebel? Look at my body.
Yeah, it is really weird, and it's, you know, and I think that's one of the themes that this movie kind of is, that by mystifying the stuff that's being cut out, by mystifying the movies, you're kind of creating a narrative that isn't really there, and you're creating kind of this demonic thing that isn't there, or a mystique that isn't or shouldn't be there. Because I mean, I was still on spoiler free, so I don't want to get into things too much. But yeah, to get back to just the sort of the, I mean, I guess we talked about our feelings in the movie. We could probably get into spoilers soon. Probably have to talk about a lot of the plot, to be honest. But the
main character, her thought process kind of reminds me of the people who blame video games for certain behaviors. She blames horror movies for certain behaviors in society.
That's very much a direct correlate, right? Because, I mean, video games became the new horror movie, right? When video games became in the 90s, when, you know, I think it happened a little bit in the early 90s with your fighting games, with your Street Fighters and Mortal Kombats, but then even more so again after Columbine, there was a big, you know, discussion about, you know, violent video games and all the rest of it. You know, it's the same thing in the early 80s with horror movies. They were looking at them going, this is making people into killers and turning people into, you know, so honestly, we're at a point now where we're luckily so far past this conversation where there's been numerous studies by people who actually study human behavior, who, you know, do these kind of things, that have just reiterated with every single result that there's no correlation, and you know, violent media doesn't actually make people violent. Like the people, by and large, are already disturbed before, you know, maybe like a specific thing in that movie will like be an inspiration for an act, but they were going to do something violent before the movie didn't make them violent, right?
It's like that character from Scream says, horror movies don't make people more make people more violent. They make violent people more creative.
yeah, there you go. That's the way to put it. Yes. I always like the joke that violent TV shows don't create psychos, but canceling them does. Which obviously that's just a silly joke, but I always get a chuckle at it. Yeah, Fox.
And some of the sweetest people you ever want to meet are the people who play the slashers.
Oh, for sure.
If you ever get a chance to meet, like, people told me Tony Todd is super sweet. I've met Kane Hodder.
I've heard Kane Hodder's a nice big guy. Yeah,
Yeah, he's really, really, really nice.
I think I've heard that just about the horror community in general is that I think there's a natural assumption that because of the subject matter that horror movies deal with is that there's a lot of weirdos in horror, and maybe there's some, but by and large, like the horror like convention community and all that kind of thing, I think it's maybe because it's people who are dealing with these types of subject matters that people are quite at ease by talking about them. That they're actually a lot more easygoing about it, so you tend to get a lot of more friendly, nice people out of it, which is kind of weird. It's actually the stuff that's more kiddie. You know, it's the superheroes where you get a lot of weirdos who are who believe about it so passionately and get so into an uproar the second that someone there's a woman version of this character now. Where's my pickaxe or pickaxe pitchfork's the traditional mob.
Yeah, that's why
utensil.
I don't review. I mean, I watch every superhero movie, but I do not review them because I just don't. I don't want the
attention,
the negativity in the comments, because there's so much gatekeeping and so much, and you have different types of fans because a lot of these comic books have been rewritten. So you have the fans of the original version, then you have the fans of the rewritten version where the characters have been changed, and it's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I've had a bit of an apathy with a lot of superhero movies recently, so I think people think about just moany and jaded and whatever, which is fine. But yeah, I don't know. I'll still critique them. I'll still rip them to shreds when the occasion calls for it. But I know this. Obviously, we're kind of spiraling a little bit into other topics, but I think that's why the topic of this movie is so interesting, is because it is so related to our love of the medium in general, and it's about horror movies in some way. It's about what inspires them, what drives people to them, and even though the film itself is not critiquing horror movies, the film itself is critiquing censorship. It's critiquing the mentality of, if you censor something and pretend that it's not there, then it festers and becomes a problem, and it becomes something else. And the happy world you've created by pretending that there is no violence and there is nothing like this is a facade and isn't real. It's unhealthy. It's unhealthy to just pretend things don't exist. And that relates to the main character, and it relates to her own trauma. So there's a nice parallel between her job and what her own life has also went through. So those things are there. Those things are there, and I very much appreciate the concepts that it's playing with, even if I don't necessarily always enjoy the investigation itself. So I think with that said, we'll say spoilers and we'll get into the premise of the movie. So like I said earlier, her young sister, we find out, disappeared when she was a child. When her little sister was 7 and she was like, I don't know, 9, 10, whatever age she was. So we get that she's got a bit of a strained relationship with her parents, does Enid, because they've kind of moved on and they've got a death certificate for her sister. We get a sense that our workplace Enid is kind of seen as the goody two shoes. She takes everything very seriously. Everyone else is a bit more easygoing. She kind of is very devout in her belief that she is doing like a service. She is saving people by censoring these films, and that she is doing the God's good work, as it were. And things start to spiral because there is two things happen. On the outside of her workplace, there's a murder where a man eats his wife's face, and it's very similar to a scene in Deranged. And because she and her partner were the ones who passed this film with some cuts, they're being blamed. And somehow it leaked to the public or the press that they're the censors, like specifically her and this other guy are the ones who passed it. So she is then the victim of obscene phone calls, not even obscene, just like berating her and saying she's a monster for letting people see this film. And then the other thing, though, and this is the main thread of the film, is that this producer, played by Michael Smiley, who I've seen in a bunch of things, he's in a few. Who's the director of Free Fire and
I'm not sure.
The Movie in the Tower and not Hitchhikers, Sightseers.
I don't know. I don't know who's the director.
You do know. I mean, you know these movies, right? You've heard of these movies. Kill List. He made Kill List too, this director.
I've heard of Kill List.
Hold on. Ben Wheatley. That's what I'm trying to say. Right, so he's in a lot of Ben Wheatley movies as Michael Smiley. Uh, but he's this hotshot producer who comes in and he's submitting another film to be classified. And the director, the mysterious director, has requested, apparently, that she herself, that Enid is the one who views it and classifies the film. Frederick North is the director. This mysterious director who has done exploitation movies. And when she sits down to watch the movie with someone else to classify it, all of a sudden, those weird flashes we've seen in our dreams of her being in the forest with her sister as a kid the day she went missing, this movie seems to look a lot like that. Like it's based on that event. And it's quite morbid because the older sister in this movie seemingly takes an axe and kills her little sister. And we do know that she she blanked out the memory of what happened that day, and she doesn't really remember a lot of it. And then, of course, the killer, this face-eating killer in the world, it turns out that he has amnesia after the fact and can't remember what he did to his wife. So it kind of presents this concept that maybe what happened is that she self-censored her brain. Like, she actually edited out the memory as a child to explain the death of her sister. Now, the movie doesn't actually outright confirm this ever. It's just kind of there for us to sort of like maybe figure out and sort of decide for ourselves that that's what happened. The movie does have a villain. There's like a big guy who is like the killer who inspired it to do this or whatever. But she like, it's this like thing, she gets really emotional watching the film and she vomits in the bathroom afterwards, and it's like, okay, and up until this point I'm really into the movie because I'm liking everything it's sort of suggesting and everything it's putting out there, and I'm like, oh, okay, all right. It maybe puts it a little bit on the nose when she talks to her coworker afterwards, and the guy's kind of like, because she says, hey, why do you think that killer can't remember what he did? And he's like, hey, it's amazing what the human brain can edit. And I'm like, oh, don't spell it out to me. Like, don't explain the censorship of someone's brain with their psyche to your censorship. Don't make it that obvious to me, please. Like, I already got it. I already got the connection. You don't have to like actually use the terminology. But I mean, how were you feeling up until this point? Like, how did you like all of this like setup with the film and the mystery of, wait, how does this look like my memory? How does this look like my past?
The first third of the movie I really liked, and I thought that it kind of, the way that it was split between her memories and the waking world, almost, I don't know why, but it kind of reminded me of Possessor. I don't know why it reminded me of Possessor, because it wasn't exactly the same type of transition style. Maybe because it's just two different realities, her memory and what's happening now. And also, when she was talking to her parents, I found that engaging when they were having, like, I don't remember whether it was tea or dinner, but they were talking and sort of not talking at the same time because their parents were trying to avoid the subject.
Yeah.
And she's trying to reintroduce the subject. I thought that had me. And then the middle part of the movie was a little bit dull, and it didn't pick back up for me until she went to go see, I believe he was the producer.
Yeah. Michael Smiley's character. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first, like, I think there's some nice transitions, like you say. There's a nice thing where it'll kind of like it'll go from like a fuzzy VHS to reality by like sort of fading into it, and that's kind of a nice like transition. There's a little flourishes like that. There's a lot of little just character moments for her. Like there's a scene like early on when she's like on the train and she's listening to like a couple who are arguing with each other. And it just really sets up the world she's in quite well. But obviously this experience of seeing this movie, she's like, okay, who's this director? Like, why does he seem to like know what happened to me as a kid? Honestly, the thing that I'd compare it to more than anything, there's a movie that Denis Villeneuve made, starring Jake Gyllenhaal, called Enemy, and the plot of that movie is that he rents a movie and he sees himself in it, and the movie becomes about him trying to find this doppelganger, like, who is this guy who looks exactly like me? So there's a little bit of that in here. She actually goes to like a video rental store and she's looking at, you know, some of the happy romantic movies that are which is actually one of the things that the movie maybe could have made more a point of, is that it doesn't really, I think you see like some people watching a cartoon at one point, but the truth is that the BBFC have to classify everything that gets released, not just the horror movies. So it's all. I almost think there could have been a bit of comedy. Like maybe there's another department where they do all the kids' films, so they're all just happy and like, oh, we watched the latest Disney film today, and it got a PG or it got a U. I use a G, basically, just for US rating comparisons. But she's at a video store and she's looking at stuff and she sees like someone come in and someone who's got like a sort of punk haircut. It's the 80s, and the guy at the counter like takes it and puts it underneath the counter, and she's like, all right, okay, I'm gonna go up and like get the, because this is before the internet where you could just search for things if you wanted to find something dodgy. She has to go up and be like, hey, do you have any of this director's previous films? I'm a big fan. And I kind of like this scene on its own because I love that she convinces him that she's not like someone trying to like catch him by actually, because she's seen all these like nasty films through her job, she's actually able to say, hey, my favorite's this movie with this scene, and she sort of describes a couple of scenes, and it's enough to make him sort of go, oh, okay, all right, I'll believe you. Yeah, I've got one of this guy's movies, and he gives her this tape. Now, I will say that this scene kind of like foreshadows the ending, because he says the last like 10 minutes are taped over with a different film, and I'm like, oh, that's going to happen. Like, that's going to happen at the end of this movie. We're going to get like a different thing at the end. And we kind of do. It's more metaphorical because it kind of becomes her fantasy. It's the last 10 minutes. But that's effectively what happens at the end of the movie, is that the last 10 minutes have been taped over with her fake world versus reality. But I like that touch. But she watches the movie, and this is the part that really made me think of Enemy, is because she sees this woman, this actress in the film, that she's convinced is her sister, who is now grown up and is now an actress in these exploitation movies, and is determined to find her. And this is where the movie I think slows down for me, is where she's investigating. She's getting the address of the producer, or she's trying to tell her parents. I really like didn't have the patience for the scene where she's telling her parents that she's found her sister in this movie, because it just, like, I know how this scene's going to go. I know they're not going to believe her. There was nothing in it that made it engaging to me, because I felt like I knew where it was going the whole time, so it was just awkward to watch. Like, she looks deranged, she looks psychotic, she looks like she's losing it, and that wasn't that fun to watch. Same with the other co-workers noticing her looking a bit more disheveled and being a little bit more neurotic and like clearly obsessed with something. Those scenes I felt were a bit more of a, I don't know, just not a chore, but like there wasn't like enough of a twist on them to give me like anything to really enjoy about them. But part of that may just be taste, because I've seen these things done enough before.
I don't know where I'm jumping ahead, but there's a scene that I quite like, and I mentioned it earlier, but when she goes to meet the producer, I really thought the movie was going to pick up more than it did. It still ended pretty well, but when she went to go see the producer and he basically sexually harasses her until he has an accident, I thought that was shot really well. I also liked, like, that actor really sold that character.
Oh yeah,
I almost feel like there was a mismatching, because the actress who plays the main character, she wasn't as strong an actress as he was an actor.
I thought she was okay, but no, you're right. Like, I think Michael Smiley, because I think it's one of those things where I don't think the movie is overly about like sexism or like the time period, because like obviously it's a very different time, but it does kind of like feel like it's of that time where he is openly kind of pervy to her immediately. Like, he immediately says, oh, who's this little treat that works for you? I mean, that's not the exact line, but he says something like that, where he's immediately kind of flirty with her and says, oh, I didn't realize your staff were so photogenic. And and like, even as he's walking away, he doesn't like quiet his voice as he says to like the boss, he's like, oh, she's quite lovely, that one. Or, you know, he's very creepy and like objectifies her immediately. But like you say, she finds his address, goes to his house, and he's like, oh, you came to my house. So I don't blame him completely for thinking that she might be interested in him, because she did just randomly show up at his house unannounced. Like, that is a bit forward. Now, we know she's trying to investigate, like, where is this director, because he might have kidnapped my sister as a child, right? That's what she's really doing. But he does try to make a move and like sort of gets up in her face. She tries to push him away, and he goes, "You show up at my house, you little prick tease," and she pushes him away, and he falls on his. He's got a trophy. He's got a trophy from like some horror like awards thing in America where it's like a woman holding an axe as the trophy. So he falls on this trophy, so that this axe statue is like sticking out of his mouth. It's like, we've all seen the death in a movie where they fall and hit the back of their head, but this is like, no, the statue went right through his head and is sticking out of his mouth. I mean, it's a fun death. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, it definitely was.
And he's enough of a creep that it's like, yeah, okay, like I'm on board for him earning this. It's a fun moment, but she finds out that the movie, there's a new movie being made, a sequel to this previous film, starring this actress with this director, being made in the forest. She goes to the forest. The hair and makeup woman mistakes her for an actress who was meant to show up, and like puts her in a gown, gets her hair all ready, and she meets the director. And it's this kind of like shady moment where like you can't see his face because all the bright lights are shining on her face, and he's trying to like get her to be passionate, and she isn't at first, but then when she starts talking about her sister, like she starts to like show some emotion. So he's like, yes, that's it, cling to that. And we get a scene that's at the same cabin, which is a lot like the one that she remembers from being a kid, and she sees this actress who she thinks is her sister, and she sees the big killer dude who she thinks is the one who kidnapped her, or at least like in her head. So all of this is warped. All of this is like, this doesn't quite make sense, but it's all in her kind of mind. It's all her. And one of the things that the movie does here that I really liked is that as she arrives at this film set, the aspect ratio gradually comes in. Like it gradually gets less wide. There's the black bars that start to just slowly come in until it's 4:3 in the middle. And it gets more VHS looking, and they start to fill in the scene where she's in the scene, the actress is screaming, the big monstrous guy is acting all scary, but then she grabs an axe, does her main character, and she whacks the big guy in the chest, and then it's like a record scratch where all of a sudden it goes back to being widescreen, and then the director walks in, and even though we didn't see them before, all of a sudden there's like a sound guy with a boom mic, and there's like someone with the camera and the light, and the actress who she thinks is her sister is like, what did you just do? What did you do to, Jimmy, or whatever his name is, like whoever the actor is who plays the big guy? And probably in the weirdest part of the movie, there's like a face that appears in the wound of the actor, like where the axe wound is. There's like an eye and a face that talks to her, and then she hacks him with the axe again, and everyone's horrified, and they're like, what did you do? What did you do? And the actress runs away. The would-be sister runs away. Alice Lee runs away. And Enid decapitates the director, who tries to like, because before he seemed really mysterious because it was all from her perspective and it was all in her head. And now it's the real world. It's went back to widescreen. He comes across as more of a normal director now. He's just a normal guy. He's like, what did you do? This is shocking. What did you do to Jimmy? What did you do? And then she hacks his head off. It goes back to 4:3 to show we're back in her head, back in her delusion. And it stays that way for the rest of the movie, basically, right until the final shot, where all of it's in her head. Alice ran away, being scared, screaming that she's not her sister. But then the delusion takes over again. We go back to 4:3, and Alice is now smiling, saying, "Thank you for saving me, sister." And it's like this happy, delirious thing in the woods. And then we get a sequence where she takes her back to her parents, and there's a rainbow, there's a literal rainbow above the house. And it's all happy and sweet music's playing, and it's the fuzzy VHS thing. But every so often it glitches, like it's been taped over something else. And that's kind of where I get back to saying that scene in the video store foreshadowed this like sort of technique where you see the thing from underneath, which is actually reality, where her parents are screaming in horror, where this actress, who presumably she's kidnapped, presumably Enid has kidnapped this actress and taken her to her parents. And Enid like turns and smiles, and they're all smiling like it's the fake happy smiles that they're all been forced to smile. And then it cuts back to widescreen, and it's the tape comes out of the VCR, and it says "Censor" in the spine is the title, and then it's the credits.
It's wild because it's almost ironic because she became a censor because she's, believes that, you know, horror movies are the bane of people's existence and they create violence and violent criminals. And yet she ends up being the most violent person. And on the one hand, it's like, well, does this prove her right because she had to watch all those horror movies? Or was she like this already? Or, well, it implies that she was like this already, and that she might have been the one that killed her sister. And then she's just blaming seeing these horror movies. And then also, what speaks to her psyche is that during the ending sequence, when she's driving the actress as her sister home, on the radio, you hear the radio announcer saying, all horror movies have been banned, and all crime is at all-time low,
Yeah.
and there hasn't been any murder or anything since horror movies have been banned. And then you see the rainbow come up behind her, and you're like, okay, this is definitely all in her head.
Yeah, I mean, that's the delusion, right? Is that it's comparing her just pretending and censoring her own mind, both as a child with whatever she did to her sister. And I think at the end of the movie, like, it feels pretty likely that she did kill her sister, given that she's this deranged and she's like this warped and she's doing all this stuff now. There's enough evidence at the end where it cuts back to reality underneath just a little bit to show their horror that she is this psychotic. But all that stuff on the radio that you mentioned with the, like, all crime is at a low and all horror movies are banned, I think that's the comparison to the world, which is, oh yes, if we ban all horror movies and anything with violence in it, all of a sudden there'll be no criminals, there'll be no murder, everything will be a happy, serene utopia where there's no sadness. And I think that really creepy last shot of her smiling at the camera before the tape ends and we get the title of the movie is just kind of like, no, this is what we get. We pretend that everything's okay. And the horror is still there. It's still underneath. So, this movie in no way is critiquing horror movies. It's critiquing this deluded belief that if you just, like, shut them in a corner somewhere and put some tape over them, that no one will know and therefore everyone will be fine and everyone will be happy. And, by an extension of that, like, obviously some horror is trashy, some is not, and some is great, and some is psychological and has a lot to say about, the human psyche and or society or whatever. But the idea that horror is important because it lets those who like it, those who view it, and those who make it to explore concepts in the darker side of our brains and explore these ideas and accept the harshness of things in the world and explore them through horror is an important part of art, right? Not just horror, but, horror specifically in this case, is that, we deal with social issues, we deal with the real horrors of the world, whether it be on a mass scale with wars or horrible political decisions that like oppress entire, groups of people. A lot of that is explored and catharsis is found through art and expression of that, and horror is very good at the metaphor of dealing with that. So when you start this movie with actual clips of Margaret Thatcher, and she did a lot of horrible things in her time in power, not related to movies. Obviously, we talk about the video Nasties because it's more directly related to horror movies, but she had a lot of awful policies, very conservative, that did a number on a lot of people. If you ask anyone who was alive or an adult through that time when she was like prime minister, they'll have some big strong opinions on her. Like they will, especially like Scotland by and large hates her. Like when she died a few years ago, there was like cheering in the streets. Like people were just like delighted she was dead. Like that's the sort of legacy that she left behind with her policies. And I think that the idea that you pretend, and obviously we're talking about Margaret Thatcher because that's what the movie kind of brings up, but any type of conservative side of politics that tries to pretend the issues aren't there, that there is no problem with certain things, does not make it true. It just means that you're living in a fantasy where that problem isn't there. But it actually is. Those real horrors are still happening. Just because you pretend there isn't entirely swaths of people who are falling victim to society failing them, whether it be through, healthcare, social care, economic like problems, whatever it may be. And I'm getting really big with the concepts here, but
Mhm.
all of it
Well,
boils down to what censorship kind of is like a little window of, which is
mhm.
we're going to pretend that these real issues aren't there. So by cutting out and not acknowledging the things, we've eliminated it. No, you haven't. They're all still happening. They're all still there.
Mhm.
Um, you're
Um,
yeah.
on
So
what you said about horror movies exploring like societal ills, and sometimes they could even be parables. And we've been doing this for hundreds of years because when you think about it, something as simple as like Little Red Riding Hood, that's a horror story. It's a story about a little girl who goes to see her grandmother and is instead attacked by a wolf. Like that's a horror story, but it was used through time to teach, children about, I guess some people theorize that it's to teach children about stranger danger, that type of thing. Or the original story, The Little Mermaid, that's a horror story.
yeah,
Like Disney made it have a happy ending, but it didn't have a happy ending.
yeah, and likewise, this movie you could argue is a
Mhm.
parable, warning
Yeah.
against the dangers of delusion and the dangers
Hmm.
of not accepting what is both on a personal level for the main character, but both on a larger society level, which is
Hmm.
the act of censorship from a government level, what that does. So there's a lot of really great things that it's tapping into. It's a great setting to have a horror movie be around someone in this role in this time
Hmm.
period is really fascinating. But I don't necessarily, and I think the direction is really strong. I think the director's got a good eye. She
Hmm.
has a lot of really nice visuals in this. There's a lot of really nice moments. That final shot of her smiling at the camera, Enid, that
Hmm.
is so good. Um, but yeah, it does sag enough in the middle where I'm not into the investigation that much that it
Hmm.
does suffer a bit, unfortunately, and doesn't quite get to like really good status. But it is commendable as far as the first effort goes, and much like with Slack's last episode, I would recommend people check it out and see if you like it, because some people do like
Hmm.
it more than others. Like I've definitely seen buzz for this, and it's connected
Oh
with some
yeah.
people, and it does to me to a point, but there is definitely some pacing and some just I don't know, just the actual investigation that the character has to do, kind of feels a little dull once it gets going. But it swings back around for the last like 10-15 minutes. But unfortunately, when you get to that point at the end, like if you've not been engaged the whole time, you've kind of lost a little bit of the luster by that point, even
Hmm.
if you do like the ending. So it's a shame that I don't love it. It's a shame that it didn't quite click with me completely. But I do think it is worth checking out, and I do think it has some great ideas and there's some nice execution. There's a good directorial eye. I think this director might be one to watch in the future. But
I agree.
there you go. What are you rating Censor?
I know they're going to get on me about this in the comments, but I'm going to say 6.5, and they're going to say, "But you gave Slacks." I know, but I can see myself rewatching Slacks for fun. This one I don't see myself rewatching.
Yeah, this is tough. Yeah, I think I agree with 6.5. I think I'm going to go with 6.5. I think I because yeah, that's 6. I'm overthinking it. Right, 6.5.
Mhm.
Let's just say 6.5. I'll leave it there. 6.5. I think it is got a lot of great ideas, and I think it's almost at that point where I really was going to really like it, and as it is, it's
Mhm.
more conflicted because I didn't love it all the way through, but a censor. So
And I'm for it to be a directorial debut. That's really good. I'm looking forward to seeing what this director does next. Because I mean, I'm pretty sure that things will improve, or she might end up with a project where that's has a little bit better writing. Because I don't want to give her all the fault because part of the lull in the middle is more due to the writing than the direction.
I mean, she did co-write the script as well, so let's not
Hmm.
take all the
Oh,
blame
okay,
from
well
her.
then, yeah, then you got to take a little bit of that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a hard thing to quantify sometimes, but um, yeah. So sags a bit in the middle, unfortunately, but I do dig a lot of what it's doing. I think it's because like it's very clear at a certain point like that it's a psychological movie, so it's
Mhm.
almost a little bit dull to see her have to interact with her parents and others once we're past that point where she's trying to convince them that something's happening. because I'm like, all right, just like, okay, we're already off the deep end with her. We can already see where it's going. I don't necessarily need to go through these beats of like them reacting to her a little bit. I find that a little bit tiring at times. Maybe if there's a different spin on it or something, I don't know. But the movie does fall a little bit victim to that. But hey, oh, there you go. That's Censor. So by all means, let us know what you think of Censor in the comments below. Like and subscribe, ding the bell for notifications. All those things do help out on YouTube a lot. That's why all YouTubers tell you to do it, because it helps grow the channel and the success. So please do hit those buttons. You can also, of course, rate us on your audio podcast app of choice, 5 stars with a review. It does help out us a lot on there as well to spread the audio version of the show. And of course, you can support us on patreon.com/MailFuzzTV for as little as $1 per month and get some bonuses, including an extra episode once a month, as well as voting rights at one of the higher tiers and all that sort of stuff. And at one of the highest tiers, of course, you can become a Patreon producer. So let me thank this month's Patreon producers of Tyler Hess, Cindy Palacios, David Short, Board Now, Al Treisman, Christopher Moy, David Brown, and Stanley. They are Patreon producers for the month of September. So thank you very much to all of those names once again. But you can also find us on Twitter at Screams Midnight. That all your Mailed Fuzz movies related twittering can be found there. Shasha, would you like to promote your channel before I completely lose my mind?
As always, you can find me on What Did I Just Watch. I don't know why I'm drawing. I know I'm drawing a blank because I'm like super tired and I'm starting to conk out. Okay. Take 2. As always, you can find me at What Did I Just Watch? And I'm continuing on with my requested suggested review month. And going into October, I will be bringing back the cosplay reviews. So stay tuned for that.
Isn't it cute? Everyone that Shasha said take 2 there, like she's expecting me to edit out the bad take.
Because that's what I would do on my channel. I edit so much. I will edit out every time I say I mean,
I edit out stuff if need be, but like, I sound like an idiot often enough in this show. Don't think I'm editing out. You sound like an idiot for 10 seconds before you recalibrate yourself.
Well, at least they know I tried to improve. There was an effort made.
This is not. I mean, I'll edit things out if I need to be, but this is not an edited show. This is a podcast discussion. So you accept your blunders for the most part, and you roll with them. That's how we roll. This is a human show where they see the vulnerability and the silliness of everything, and that includes us making a tit of ourselves. So there you go. Take 2. Like, she expects me to edit this. How dare she? Giving me work. Madness. Absolute madness. Is there anything you'd like to add before I give the final outro?
That's it. I would just say I would suggest this movie. If you like Possessor, if you like Saint Maud, you're probably going to like this too.
Yeah. I don't think it's as good as either of those.
No, I agree.
Because I really like Possessor and I really like Saint Maud, so I'd say they're both great movies, whereas this is good, but with some I guess like first time or growing pains that I'd maybe say put along with it. But I know a lot of people are even more positive than we are, though some people don't agree with that. Some people think it's just a great movie. So by all means, check it out, find out for yourself. It's not one that I'm saying, oh, avoid it at all costs, it's a train wreck, because it's not. It's got a lot of good qualities and a lot of good ideas, so check it out. But there you go, that is us. So thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching scary movies, and if you see someone wearing the sacred mask, repeat to yourself, hockey season ended months ago.